There will be days when you don't want to train. These are great days. These are the days champions separate themselves from everyone else.
If sports entrepreneur Paul Rabil hadn't picked up a stick and ball and willed himself through thousands of hours of practice with a stick and ball in high school, college, and as a professional to be a legendary lacrosse champion, then he might have fit right in at Citadel and Citadel Securities. In Paul's book, The Way of the Champion, Pain, Persistence, and the Path Forward, Paul's journey parallels many of the values of our firms: integrity, winning, meritocracy, learning, and extraordinary colleagues. In his extraordinary career, still surely shy of its midpoint, Paul has lived them all. Paul joined us recently for a slice of Citadel, one of our regular Connect conversations with a cross-section of our colleagues. They're researchers, engineers, analysts, traders, each slice part of a bigger whole, making up the most successful hedge fund in history and the world's most important market maker. And as we listen to the wisdom from a leader like Paul, what does one eat at a slice of Citadel? Slices of pizza, naturally, this time from Delizia 73, an Upper East Side institution since 1983.
I'm gonna play hard for each of you, and I know I can count on each of you to do the same for us. Us! Let's go! Hands in, together on three, 1, 2, 3, together.
Our colleagues heard from Paul about winning 2 NCAA crowns at Johns Hopkins, about earning 4 All-America designations, about forming a pro sports league, the PLL, from scratch, and about his latest notch in his stick, a new 5-year media rights deal with ESPN that makes the Disney-owned broadcaster an equity holder with skin in the game to take the sport of lacrosse to new heights, just as Lax returns to the Olympics as a medal sport in Los Angeles at the 2028 Games.
So we're in our 4th year of 4 with ESPN. We just signed a new 5-year deal. They made an equity investment as well.
As Ken Griffin said recently, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. Paul knows that, and we all know it too. So come in the room for a slice of Citadel with us. Before we join our conversation with Paul at 425 Park Avenue in New York, hear from him reading a passage from his book, The Way of the Champion. This from his chapter, You Can't Miss a Day. It's all part of Paul's playbook, and it applies equally well to Citadel and Citadel Securities.
In the summer going into my freshman year of high school, I was at a lacrosse camp. Every college coach I'd ever heard of was there, from every school I'd ever seen a shirt for. At the end of a morning session, the players packed into a gym for a talk from one of the all-time coaching legends in our sport. He began with a simple question. Who here wants to play at a Division I school? Every kid in the room raised their hand. I'll tell you how to do it, he said. And on top of that, I'll tell you how to get a full scholarship to play at a college of your choice. Now, who here wants that? Every hand shot up. It's a simple formula, he said. From this day forward, through your senior year of high school, you have to shoot 100 shots a day. And that's it. You do that, I guarantee you'll get a scholarship to a Division I college of your choice. Here's the catch, he said. You can't miss a day. Not a holiday. You can't miss when it's pouring down rain. You can't miss because you had a game the night before or the day of. You can't miss a day because you're on vacation. And if you can't find a goal, make one up. You have to find a way. I believe him. So every single day, rain or shine, I practiced. Everywhere I went, I would find a wall to throw against, a goal to shoot on, from my home state of Maryland to New York, California, and Washington. Me, a stick, and a ball. For 20 years. It doesn't matter how ambitious your goal is. You get there by taking one small step after one small step. For 30 minutes a day, 100 shots on net. Whatever reps are in your sport, in your business, or your chosen field, you do them. And there is only one catch. You can't miss a day.
It's great to be back with you.
Great to see you, Paul. Welcome to Citadel.
How many in here played lacrosse or have watched lacrosse by a show of hands? Cool.
Pretty
Great.
good 50-50. Turnout.
Awesome.
What you're looking at, Paul, in addition to a large collection of lacrosse players from Citadel, is a slice of Citadel. These are engineers. These are portfolio managers. These are researchers. These are analysts. These are traders, all of whom are at the top of the game. They are a slice of Citadel, sort of like sauce topping cheese and flour. Tell us about the Rabil upbringing in Gaithersburg and what would constitute a pizza night.
We grew up and would have Friday night pizza. My dad was a salesman. He worked for a paper company for 35 years. My mom was an art teacher. And they just both worked extraordinarily hard and did their best to put us into things that we were interested in. I'm the middle child of an older brother who I work with per Josh's note and a younger sister. But on Friday nights, we would have pizza. And that would either be DiGiorno's, where it would get thrown into the oven by my mom and kicked out. And then we'd race to try to get to seconds faster than each other. And then the other chain that we would go to is Lido's. You guys are familiar with Lido's? Kind of like no cut corners. And
here at Citadel, as I was telling you, we pride ourselves on our kitchens. We have a great hot breakfast, hot lunch every day. Don't normally eat pizza, but what is the usual routine that keeps you as sharp as you can, lets you play at 100%?
Well, I tell young and aspiring athletes that nutrition should not and likely will not be glamorous if you are looking for performance fuel. And when I used to think about nutrition, I had a nutritionist probably 15 years ago, and it was like pretty rudimentary stuff. And so my strategic listening side kicked in and was like, okay, who are the athletes that are jacked? Bodybuilders, right? What's their nutrition routine? And that's really available. And then you start learning, whether it's from Arnold Schwarzenegger or Kai Green or others, that our body, if you're an active athlete, has the ability to consume 20 grams of protein every 2 hours and find use of it. And then it comes down to timing. When are you eating before, and what type of food are you eating before as fuel, and what are you doing afterwards? Because every time you lift or shoot, in my case, your muscles have little micro tears, and then they build back like calluses. And so if you get, from a timing standpoint, the right protein in there. So I would just find the clean and lean proteins like chicken and salmon, and I would eat a lot of tofu because that was part of our family's diet growing up. And then the right vegetables and the right fruits are sort of throw-ins, but those should always be there. And then carbohydrates are really important. Part of that word is hydrate. And if you're an athlete, your carbs and your saturated and unsaturated fats are your fuel. And if you do a VO2 max test, which is another level of strategic or curiosity around how your system works, it'll tell you based on level of workout, call it zone 1, 2, and 3, where you're consuming your fuel the most. And so for me, when I start working out, a lot of the fats are being used, and then it jumps into the carbohydrates, and then it tries to scrape sugars. So at halftime, I would have, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to top off the fuel. So now as an entrepreneur, I'm not burning as many calories, and I'm not lifting as much. So I have to be a little bit more tight with the way that I'm consuming, how often and what.
You were just in Kansas City this weekend for the Premier Lacrosse League All-Star game. You have a relationship in London, so you're constantly going between time zones. You talked about, even in this piece, gamifying sleep. What's your recipe for making sure you're well rested?
Well, there's just so much science that indicates that we perform better when we sleep well. And there are a few individuals, I am not one of them, and I would say it's fair to assume that you're not, that require just less sleep. And so if you think about like the appropriate range, some of it is meeting with a sleep expert, but probably 7 to 9 hours if you can a night, which requires making some sacrifice. But ultimately, you guys are in this room as talented executives because you figured out how to chip away 1% at a time and improve relative to your peers. And I think with the evolution of AI as well, it's more incumbent on us as humans to understand our differentiators and how to perform better. And I think one of them is our ability to curate, and that requires taste and experience. And to be at your best, I think, having the optimal amount of energy. And I noticed that when I sleep well, it's almost like you can get a whole new chapter out of whatever happened yesterday. Less stressed, performing at a higher marker. So I used Whoop, I've used 8 Sleep, I've used different technologies to try to understand how I can better optimize. But I also rely on sort of instinct, so I'm not as data focused or solely data focused, I should say.
At this point in your life, as an entrepreneur, not playing as much, how do you keep fit?
Well, weight training is becoming more and more prevalent, I should say. It was almost reserved for high-performing athletes at some point, and then even high-performing athletes in the NBA in the 80s didn't weight train because they would think that it would throw off their jumper. So I think we're still relatively early days of sports science and application, but it has improved leaps and bounds since when I started playing sports in the 90s. But the most recent evidence that's out there is that weight training is actually being proven to support your long-term health and even cardiovascular upside relative to compared to running. Or other traditional cardiovascular workouts. And that's like a societal shift. It hasn't made its way up, I think, to the sort of like mainstream media consistently to the point where people adopt it. But weight training, and it's great for me because as I've now retired, I sort of like position my body in dog years because I've played professionally for almost 15 years and I've had so many surgeries that my knees are creaky and my ankles and Achilles don't function as well as they used to. So I would worry that cardiovascularly, I would struggle once I retired, but I do weights and I circuit train.
Now let's head back a little bit into the Paul Rabil origin story. You write about a moment when your neighbor Bruce Nishanicki did something that changed the course of your life. What did Bruce do?
He gave me his backup stick because I grew up not knowing what lacrosse was, despite growing up in Maryland. I think there's a little bit of a misconception that the hotbeds in lacrosse are Maryland and New York, but it's really Long Island and Baltimore. That's where if you grow up in those regions, then you have no choice. You're given a stick in the cradle. So I didn't start playing until I was 12, and at the time, and I think about this a lot, even with our youth business at the PLL and the WL, it's like where are the intersections where we're meeting kids for the first time and helping them develop their skill and are they growing physically and intellectually? And so for me, I cared a lot, like an insecure 12-year-old boy around being with my friends. And he was my best friend as my neighbor. And he was like, why don't you come play with our other friends this game called lacrosse? And otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to play because it's expensive. My neighbor giving me his backup stick and backup equipment enabled me to try a sport and essentially fall in love with it. Otherwise, I never would have played.
Talk about what you've sort of been part of, this democratization of professional sports that has created all sorts of different value for different people with different niches.
The way that I think about modern media, part data, so we're in this pretty transcending shift to where 70% on average of what's consumed by each of us on a daily basis is short form content, and that's free. And then 30% is long form. Movies, sports, going to cinema, it costs money. So there's an existential crisis around the trend of consumption of short-form content and the value chain of long-form goods, which I think help progress humanity forward. And you think about like art and just like complex conversations that take some time. So that's challenge one. Challenge two is the cord cutters. So the broadcast cable business for the first time since its inception now has shifted to where streaming consumption is higher and advertising dollars are going more into streaming than they are into broadcast and cable. So that's a huge flip. So we're now officially in the streaming era. When we started the PLL in 2018, part of what investors were betting on is that we were going to take advantage of this shift in the marketplace, this transition over the next 7 years, which I think we've done pretty well. And then the third is there's just never been this much optionality and thereby fragmentation. So those are the three big challenges when we look at media, and how does that make its way into the business world? Is you think about customer acquisition or fan acquisition, and if you can understand that, especially the price to acquire a new fan or a new customer, then you can put together a business plan to go out and fundraise against it to acquire fans based on the lifetime value of that fan or that customer. But knowing how to reach them when and where is really important. So for us, the undercurrent of all of this, which is positive, is that overall sports consumption is up. It just happens in various places. So the easier way was during the monolithic consumption era of television, where 104 million people would watch Cheers, and like that's like a Super Bowl viewership, and that was just the way we consumed. So the networks were driving value on affiliate fees that they would get from the MVPDs, so it's Comcast or Time Warner. They would drive revenue through advertising, and then if you fast forward to today, it's subscription revenue. Now what they're having to pivot to, and kind of back to Pat McAfee, is when ESPN cuts their deal with Pat, it includes his YouTube channel, because his AdSense dollars, which is essentially 50%, goes to the creator, and why YouTube is the biggest streaming platform in the world, as they've had a built-in monetization element for people who use it, unlike Meta and Google that are trying to play catch-up in, and even TikTok are paying creators now, but it's so part of the fabric of YouTube. So you have to be, the network executives are going, cool, we have to figure out, we can't resist anymore, we have to figure out where all the monetization opportunities are, and so is Madison Avenue and the advertising business. It was easier, sometime I long for the monolithic era. Like I love the idea that culturally we used to go to the movies on Fridays. Like that's, I think, the biggest challenge. We could talk about like the cinematic experience and things of that nature. And like, Ted Sarandos can continue to, butt heads with Bob Iger around like, going and like try to win talent because they have a theatrical release versus not. But ultimately, the next generation, they're not going to the movies to hang out on the weekend. And that's what I did. I think that's what a lot of us did. I can't really tell the age discrepancy, but it feels like we have a good range here. And that's gone. So we just have to adapt and be agile, and we built our business to take advantage of the 70% so that we could lift off pro lacrosse into a place where I believed it could have been in the year 2001 when Major League Lacrosse first started.
So bring us back to this moment that you and Mike ponder this offer that would have netted you both $6 million, going back to this time that you put your idea on a napkin, and whether you thought $36 million was the right price for you or you were worth a whole lot more.
Well, we felt like what we were building was worth more in the long term, and we also felt like if we traded hands with the incumbent, which was MLL who had given us that offer, that it would feel really hollow because our mission was tied to trailblazing the future of professional lacrosse. It's player and fan focused, and if pro lacrosse was working, I would have planned when I retired to syndicate a group and bid to buy a team. If it's not working and you believe in the industry and the discipline, then you got to go the more difficult route, which is start a league from scratch. It was not our preference. We originally had Viking Capital at the time covering overhead to go to MLL and try to buy them in 2016 and 17. Couldn't figure that out, so then we were building a parallel path with venture capital to start a league of our own. And you guys can do math that at that time, we just had I think we had done 2 rounds of financing, so Mike and I owned about 30% of the company. And then when you raise more money, you take on more dilution. But it's a capital-intensive business. It's sort of like building a skyscraper in Manhattan, where you have to like finance losses to go really deep into the ground, such that when you build up and hit that break-even point, and ideally create a business that's profitable, it'll have been worth it. Sports leagues and teams trade on right now 8 to 12 times revenue, which is an extraordinarily high multiple. The Celtics just moved for a blended rate of north of $7 billion, and they lost $75 million in 2024. So as a lot of like astute, more profound investors than me would say, is like kind of a couple things. One, if you're going to invest in sports, you have to make sure that it's the tier 1 property of any given discipline. I think right now we're seeing a lot of competition in pro sports, but they're tier 2 and 3 properties. So the tier 1 would be the NBA, the NFL, the the PLL and the WL in our case. And that leads to sort of the larger value proposition. The second thing is sort of the breakdown of why these things are so investable. Scarcity, number one, which helps drive some of that multiple. The second is live IP. So you have, intellectual property that can be licensed and making a couple $2 billion a year for the NFL or the NBA by aligning with, Hershey's or P&G brands. And then the third, and then you have the live experience, which I think if what I was saying earlier might be true, and the craze of technology and AI and social media, the value proposition of in real life events will continue to grow. Our business plan was a little bit more sophisticated in this napkin. I used it, I would use it as a prompt ahead of a media hit. It's really holistic. Our company is different than most team sports leagues that are trade associations, where you have the commissioner's office that's servicing the 30 to 32 owners, and each of those owners have their own P&L, and there's no equity in the top co. In our case, we're a C Corp. We own the league IP, all 8 of our teams, the WL, all 4 of those teams. We own our youth business. We own a media company called the Lacrosse Network. And that enables us, I think, to move more quickly and be more agile and more effective with corporate partners and our network partner, which we'll get to in ESPN. And it has allowed us to basically grow faster than if we had sold teams when we started.
PLL is relatively young at 7 years. We talked about this deal now with ESPN. It's been your media partner since 2022, but now it's an equity stakeholder. Been reported, not confirmed, around 3%. And that's going to transform your league as it heads into the Olympics. But I've got so many more questions, Paul, I can ask, and I've got plenty to go, but I want to open up the conversation to everyone here. And I had a clip of an article on the Premier Lacrosse League website. The headline was, "A long 365 days inside Cole Williams' road back to Archer's championship series." Cole Williams was an All-America lacrosse player at Johns Hopkins, finished his career there in 2021, played in a school record 67 games with 102 goals and 55 assists as an attackman and midfielder. And in addition to being a professional lacrosse player now with the PLL, he's also on another team, the rates and credit ops team of Citadel Securities. Cole Williams, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, Cole.
As we open it up, Cole, talk about your experience as both a PLL player and a Citadel Securities player, and you've got the first question for Paul.
Sure. Yeah. Paul Rabil is the pinnacle of the sport when it comes to the innovation that the PLL brings. And it's been an honor to play in the league for him. We actually kind of grew up in the same area. I grew up watching Paul at Johns Hopkins, and I was actually able to go play at Johns Hopkins myself. So, what I learned at Johns Hopkins and what I've learned from Paul is kind of what I've taken into my career at Citadel. With that, at Citadel, we pride ourselves at being being in the forefront of innovation and thinking outside of the box and having that mindset. Now, having played in the PLL for the past 5 years, I know the PLL has that mindset. For those people that are less familiar with the PLL, can you elaborate how you instilled that outside the box mentality to managing the PLL?
Yeah.
And maybe where you developed it. Was it something from college? Was it something from your childhood?
It's a great question. And I got to coach Cole when he was in high school at an event called Project 9, and he was the same size as he is now in high school. So it didn't go well for his opponents, or really for me, I think. So when I talk to our colleagues today, I say, like, in the workforce, you need to be able to do 3 things really well. The first is be a subject matter expert at whatever it is you do. And that means you're dialed in, but you're also consuming from outside of your general role and responsibility or subject matter, so you can be predicative, right? Subject matter expert. The second is you have to develop the skill of advocacy on your own behalf. We have several really talented employees at the company who haven't quite yet figured out how to lobby their subject matter expert, their point of view. And the third is you have to go execute and post-mortem after your execution. And that mindset I took to sport, and the subject matter expertise was when I was a rookie drafted the Boston Cannons, I subscribed to the Sports Business Journal. And I would get it every Wednesday, and I would take it on the plane with me, and I would just read about the sports business. I didn't know I was going to start a pro league, but I knew that if I wanted to be a full-time pro lacrosse player, which I'll come back to Cole now on, that I needed to understand the business because deals weren't going to come flowing to a lacrosse player no matter how good I was. So I learned about the sponsorship business, the media business, and then I self-taught myself social media because Facebook launched their fan pages in 2008, the year I graduated from Hopkins. At the time, there were only cat videos on YouTube, and Twitter and Instagram hadn't launched. Certainly not TikTok. So I was an early adopter and pretty hardcore user. And I started spending time with the heads of sports at each of those platforms too, to be like, how can I jump ahead of my peers who probably have larger audiences in basketball, baseball, and football?
I'm curious if you could touch on your time as a player. Like, what were some of the big roadblocks that you had to break through to reach your top levels of game, and what were some of the techniques that you used to unlock those?
When I look back at my career, the big turning points were massive losses and failures and injuries. And I think, I lost a world championship game to Canada in Denver. I lost my senior year on ESPN national championship game to Syracuse. My MVP year, I broke my foot. So I never got to the year following my MVP, I broke my foot, and that was really hard. Personally, I've been through a divorce. Work-wise, starting a league against a competitor and getting a lawsuit sent to you is, all these moments are really dark and challenging. But what I've learned is they can become fuel, and your turnaround is where you experience the most growth, so long as you take accountability and then dig in. And I think that lesson, which hopefully I hit on in the book in various ways, because it's not just about my experiences. I highlight many athletes, entrepreneurs, and authors and entertainers that have been through different things and can kind of pull a specific lesson that might help. Because there is no blueprint for any of us, but I've found that the commonality is often being able to handle pain, persist through it, and then pick up all the new skills as a result. So I think that level of toughness in my career was what led me to having the career that I had, which was not short of a bunch of losses and bad games and injuries and the likes.
Well, Paul Rabil, thanks so much for sharing a slice of Citadel with us. Thanks for coming.
Appreciate it.